everyone, and welcome to this Draftbit tutorial. This is Rumeysa, and today we will be setting up sign up and login screens in Draftbit. We will dive into how to handle user authentication, receive auth tokens, and save them as device variables for making authorized API calls. Before we jump into the setup, let's briefly discuss some concepts. So, what is an API? It stands for Application Programming Interface, and as an analogy, you can think of it like a waitress in a restaurant. The waitress takes your request, sends it to the chef in the kitchen, and then brings back your order. For example, imagine you have a local events app on your phone. When you open the app and request the current events for your location, the app sends an API request to the event server. The server processes this request, gathers the local events data, and sends it back to the app as an API response. The app then displays this information to you in a user-friendly format. This interaction between the app and the server facilitated by the API. The menu in the restaurant is divided into different sections, like starters, desserts, and drinks. Just like how you might have a section of the menu for starters and another for desserts, an API has different endpoints for different types of data or operations. For example, in an events app, you might have an endpoint for upcoming events, another for event details, and another for user registration. Some API endpoints require authorization to ensure that only authenticated and permitted users can access sensitive data and perform specific actions. Think of an authorized API call like a VIP section in a restaurant. In order to get an access to that section, you would need to be first registered to get an ID for your VIP membership. If you have the VIP membership ID, you can give an order in that section. But if you don't have that ID with you, your request will be denied. In technical terms, during sign-up or login, the server verifies the user, say with email and password, and issues a special key called an authorization token. This token acts like your digital ID, proving you are authorized to access certain data or actions throughout the app. Now let's begin our process for endpoint creation in Draftbit. We will be using Xano as our backend service. After you create your Xano account, it will automatically set up a default table for users and generate API endpoints for user-related actions. You can check these in the API sections here, the default API group. We will be focusing on the basic authentication endpoints. You should see 3 endpoints available, one for sign up, one for login, and one for auth.me. Although Xano provides open API spec that you can directly use for endpoint creation in Draftbit, we will walk you through how to integrate these endpoints manually, one by one. This approach is valuable because not all backend services offer this option, so understanding the basics of REST API integration in Draftbit will be very beneficial for you. First, let's copy the base URL from Xano. Then head over to Draftbit, select the data icon here to open API and Cloud Services model. Choose Xano from the list and paste the base URL here. Let's name this service and save the service. Now let's configure the sign-up endpoint. For this, we should go back to Xano. We will locate the sign-up endpoint. So before integrating it with Draftbit, let's test it in Xano to ensure it's working correctly. So you will need to provide the necessary information such as here name, email, and password as inputs. When successful, Xano will generate an auth token for this user, which allows the user to access personalized data within the app. There you go. In Draftbit, we will replicate this schema to save the sign-up endpoint successfully. So here, hit the new endpoint. And this was a post endpoint. The role is to register a new user, and the path will be same as here. Request body will look like this, but for testing purposes, make sure to use new user credentials, and we need to create some temporary variables here. So once done, you'll have a working sign-up endpoint. Let's test it. Yeah, there you go. This means the endpoint creation is successful. We should save it. Now let's set up the login endpoint. And here in the Run and Debug section, you will see the inputs as email and password. We will have to use former user that we have created before. I'll copy this one. We'll again hit to the new endpoint button. This was again a post endpoint, and the role should be not delete, I'm sorry, it should be login. The request body will appear something like that, but again, we need some variables here. In order to make it work in your screen, you should create variables here. No additional headers, and as an email. Now let's test it. So since the auth token is essential for authorized API calls, we need to store it securely within our app. So I'll just copy this one and save this endpoint. Let's close this model. And in variables section, you will see the variables options here. If you want to avoid requiring users to log in each time they open the app within the token's expiration period, we recommend storing the token as a device variable, because device variables persist across sessions even when the app is closed, unlike app variables, which reset to their default values. So we will just create a device variable here called auth header. We're pasting the auth token after the barrier prefix. The barrier keyword helps the server identify the type of token being sent in the request. Now that we have a valid auth token, let's configure the authorized auth.me endpoint using this token. The auth.me endpoint is used to retrieve the logged in user's information based on the provided auth token. So we don't have any inputs here, but actually we are providing the auth header. In the header section, it returns the user information to us. New endpoint. This is a get method. So here we need to provide the auth token in the header section. We're choosing the auth header global variable, the device variable that we have created recently. And there you go. So now we can store these values in separate device variables to use them throughout your app. Name, email, and user ID. Let's save this. And we're done. Now we will be focusing on the action stack for sign up and login screens. Let's start with the sign up screen. Here we have a simple form with fields for the user's name, email, and password. We're using one of our example screens. You can find it here. We need to set up a flow of actions for sign up process. So we need to choose the sign up button and navigate to the interactions tab in the properties panel. Select on press trigger to open action editor. But What kind of actions or logic is needed in sign up or login process? You can make this process sophisticated by incorporating some complex features, but a basic action flow for sign up or login would look something like this. The process starts when the user enters their credentials and clicks the login or sign up button. Once the button is clicked, the app sends the user's credentials to the server for verification. This is where the backend processes the information and checks whether the credentials are valid. The server then sends back a response. This response is typically in JSON format and contains the results of the verification process. If the login sign-up is successful, the server includes an authentication token in the response. This token is crucial as it allows the app to authenticate the user in subsequent requests, so we need to store it securely. The app then checks the authentication token. If there's a token coming from response, the app proceeds to navigate the user to the home screen, indicating a successful login or sign-up. If there isn't, or if there is an error in the process, the app will show an error message to the user, preventing access and guiding them to try again. Now let's see how we can implement this logic in the action editor of the builder. We will start now structuring our action stack for sign-up process. For this, make sure that you have chosen the sign-up button and go to the Interactions tab, select On Press Trigger to open Action Editor. We will first choose API Request action, and we need to configure it to point to our sign-up endpoint that we have created before. We should map the input fields to the request body parameters name, email, password. So values of these input fields should come from these components in our screen. So let's go back to our screen. In the data source of these text input components, for example, name input, we need a variable assigned in order to make it dynamic. You can either do that in the variables section in this model or directly here in the data tab, because we have the option of creating a screen variable directly here. And don't forget to add set variable action for the text inputs. It will be automatically added when we have created the screen variable in place, so we should be good. We can go back to the action editor. In the body configuration, we will choose the screen variables that are assigned for the inputs. Finally, we define a result name for this action to use it in subsequent actions. In the response handling section, we need to capture the auth token from the API response if there is any. So we will use extract key action. Use the action result sign up response as an input. Let's add the key path as auth token. We will again give a result name, but the API response may fail too due to several reasons, so we need to handle the error state as well. If the response is unsuccessful, Xano will return a message in the response. We need to extract that using again extract key action. Let's give a result name. Now, we need to check if the auth token is available for the user, so we will use an if and else block here. The condition will be the auth token itself. So choosing the action result, we have two options. If the auth token is available, we will save it into the global variable we created at the beginning. If not, we will display an error message. Let's start by completing the true branch. We will use the set variable action to save the auth token. So remember, we have already created our auth header global variable. And we also need to add barrier prefix. This should be followed by a navigate action to move to the next screen. So the destination is, we have only blank screen right now. Let's choose that. This should be a home screen or a kind of dashboard, whatever you want. For the other branch, for the false branch, where the auth token is not available, indicating that there's an error, we already extracted the error message, so we need to save it into a variable and display it in our screen. To do this, we first need to create a screen variable for the error message. Let's do that. Once the screen variable is set up, if you want to display it as a text on our screen, we can select the text component and go to the data tab. We need to define a variable here. And we will choose the screen variable that we have created. Since we want to display this error message only when there's an error, we will set up a conditional display with the condition being the error screen variable. Now go back to the action editor and use the set variable action to assign the error message to the error message screen variable. The action result coming from extract key action. Let's try this out. There you go. And when we go back, and if we try to sign up with the same information, we should get an error message. So let's do that. There you go. Now let's continue with login screen. For the login screen, we will use one of our example screens. The screen includes fields for email and password and a login button. The action stack is similar to the sign up screen, with the main difference being the endpoint we're using. First, let's check the input fields for email and password and create variables in the screen scope to store these values. We will also create another screen variable to store any error messages. Next, we will build our action stack. Let's select the sign in button and go to the triggers, on press trigger. We will start with an API request, this time using the login endpoint. In the body configuration, we will use the email and password screen variables. Again, make sure to give the result name so we can use it in the following actions. In the second step, we will extract the auth token using the extract key action. Input will be login response and the path will be auth token. We will save the result name. If there is an error, we will extract the message using, again, the extract key action. This time path will be message. And again, we're saving the result name. Now we will set up an if-else action based on whether the auth token exists. And the condition would be auth token. So we will be using the set variable action in the true branch, setting the auth header device variable, the auth token, and don't forget to add barrier prefix. And then we will use navigate action to navigate user to the home screen. In our case, it's just a blank screen. If the auth token doesn't exist, so in the false branch, we will set the error message. So again, we're using the set variable action. This time, we are setting the screen variable that we have created for error message and setting the value that we have extracted from our response. Now let's see it in action. There you go. And let's make an error. In the upcoming tutorial, we will be talking about conditionally navigate user using auth.me endpoint.